Garrett was the one who had suggested they go camping in the Tongass National Forest. Away from the busyness of life, they could breathe in the pristine air, feel the ancient wisdom from the towering trees, and listen to the quiet murmur of nature. And Bridger? Bridger was ecstatic. The family's German shepherd darted among the trees, splashed in the streams, and basked in the vibrant green landscape. Maddie watched Bridger with delight, her eyes following his every movement. Garrett observed, rather indifferent to the dog, but pleased his wife was happy. On the last day of their trip, disaster struck. Bridger disappeared. Hours turned into a restless night as they searched, Maddie's voice growing hoarse from calling his name, and Garrett's flashlight dimming as time wore on. They found him the next morning, sniffing his way back into their camp. Mud-caked and wet, but seemingly unharmed. "Oh, Bridger, don't you ever scare me like that?" Maddie wept, holding him close. Garrett shrugged. "Dogs wander, he's fine." Once back home, subtle changes in Bridger's behavior began to manifest. Initially, they were so subtle that they seemed like quirks. He would tilt his head in a peculiar way when they talked, as if understanding. His gaze lingered longer, almost as if he were contemplating something far beyond canine comprehension. Then the viciousness began. It started with a growl at the mailman, escalated to snapping at the neighbor's kid. Bridger even lunged at Garrett when he tried to take off his muddy boots. "What's gotten into him?" Garrett asked. "He's probably just stressed from the trip. Give him time," Maddie suggested, though she was a little worried herself. The worry solidified when Garrett found the first patch of fungus. It was a dull, grayish green, growing around a small scratch Bridger had on his hind leg. "We should get this checked," he told Maddie. "We will, but it's just a fungal infection." "How dangerous could it be?" she replied. The answer was more dangerous than they could imagine. Days passed, and Bridger's intellect seemed to grow exponentially. He figured out how to open doors. He'd manipulate situations to get what he wanted, like herding them towards the treat jar. And then there were the increasingly complex toys he'd play with, solving them in a matter of minutes when it had taken him hours before. Garrett stumbled upon an article about a strange, unidentified fungal infection affecting the wildlife in the Tongass National Forest. Reports suggested radically altered behaviors in infected animals, heightened aggression, and even intelligence. "We have to do something," Garrett said, showing Maddie the article. It took the ruins of their living room for her to agree. It seemed Bridger had torn through the furniture, his eyes glinting with a malevolence they had never seen before, and, terrifyingly, chunks of that grayish-green fungus now growing out of patches of his fur. "We have to lock him up. Call animal control. Maybe they can help him. We need to—" Maddie stopped, gazing at her once loving pet. This wasn't Bridger anymore. She knew what had to be done. They grabbed what they could use as weapons, a fireplace poker for Garrett and a kitchen knife for Maddie. The plan was simple. Lock Bridger in the basement, barricade the door, and call for help. Terrifyingly, Bridger seemed to sense their plan. As they tried to lure him into the basement, he refused to move, staring at them with an intensity that froze them in place. They retreated, barricading themselves in the garage instead. "We'll call for help. We have to get that thing out of him," Maddie said, tears streaming down her face. They wedged the garage door shut. Garrett dialed the number, but just as he did, they heard a scratching sound. "The dog door," Maddie whispered. They had forgotten to block the dog door leading into the garage. And there he was, pushing through the flap, eyes glowing with an eerie intelligence and tendrils of grayish-green fungus protruding out of his body like demonic spores. Garrett swung the poker, but Bridger dodged it with ease, lunging for him. At the last moment, Maddie intervened, the knife plunging into Bridger's side. He let out a high-pitched howl, an otherworldly noise filled with pain and anger, and fell. Maddie sobbed, holding the lifeless body of her once-beloved dog. Garrett dropped the poker, his eyes meeting Maddie's. "We had no choice," he said softly, gripping her shoulders. Maddie nodded. her eyes filled with a blend of relief and immeasurable sadness. That's when they heard it, a soft whimper coming from the lifeless body. Bridger twitched, the fungal patches on his fur glowing slightly. The knife wound seemed to close, knitting itself back together. What's happening?" Garrett stammered. Before their eyes, Bridger's form shuddered, and then he seemed to split, like a cell dividing, the fungus acting as a catalyst. Where once there was one Bridger, now there were two, each with those same intelligent, malevolent eyes. Maddie stared in horror. Whatever they had faced was far from over, and the price of underestimating their loyal pet had just doubled. They were now against an entity, or entities, that were far smarter and far more dangerous than they could have ever imagined. What had come back from the Tongass National Forest was not their Bridger, and whatever it was multiplying. The phone fell from Garrett's hand, the line still open. But help, whatever form it might take, felt like a universe away. Both Bridgers growled, a sound of malevolent intent and dark intelligence, as tendrils of fungus reached out toward them.
Ellie Harper stared at the vibrant green and yellow parrot perched on its golden cage. "Polly," she said, in a tone reserved for newborns and cute pets, "do you want a cracker?" Polly cocked its head, its beady eyes seeming to size her up, then squawked, "Polly wants a cracker!" With a chuckle, Ellie tossed a small cracker into the cage. Her husband, Mark, walked into the living room, his eyes red from hours in front of the computer screen. "How's Polly doing?" he asked, eyeing the bird. "As talkative as ever, and I swear, he mimics Danny's voice so well, it's like he's still here with us." Mark nodded. Their son Danny had been an avid bird lover, but a year ago he had fallen victim to a sudden aggressive illness, leaving Mark, Ellie, and their teenage daughter, Lily, to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives. Danny's parrot, Polly, had been his most prized possession, and now it resided with them, a vivid reminder of a life snuffed out too soon. Over dinner that evening, Lily kept glancing at the birdcage, which had been moved closer to the dining table at her insistence. "Mom, have you noticed Polly has been acting strange lately?" "How so?" Ellie looked concerned, pausing with her fork halfway to her mouth. "Well, it said something earlier in Grandma's voice, your mum's voice, Mum, and it wasn't just, 'Polly wants a cracker.' It was something she used to say, 'Don't count your chickens before they hatch.'" Mark and Ellie exchanged glances. "Sweetie, parrots mimic. Maybe you're just missing Grandma," and thought. Just then the parrot squawked, "Don't count your chickens before they hatch." Ellie's face turned white, and her fork clattered onto her plate. For days, the family became increasingly fascinated and unnerved by Polly's utterances. It began to mimic Ellie's late father, Mark's deceased brother, even their old neighbour, Mrs. Henderson, who used to babysit Danny. Each time, the phrases were things these people had said, as if snippets of their spirits were trapped in the bird's vocal cords. It wasn't long before nostalgia turned to bone-chilling dread. Polly began reenacting conversations, longer sentences and exchanges that Ellie recognised as the last interactions she'd had with her deceased loved ones. Conversations that had happened in the privacy of hospital rooms, in hushed voices on deathbeds, spoken as if the parrot had been there, invisible but ever listening. "Ellie, take care of the family, I love you." The voice was an uncanny imitation of her father's gravelly tone, his last words to her. Tears filled Ellie's eyes. Mark, concerned, suggested they cover Polly's cage, thinking maybe darkness would halt its eerie tirades, but even under the cloth, muffled words came out, this time in Danny's voice. "Mum, it's getting dark, isn't it?" Ellie screamed, pulling the cloth off the cage. The room seemed to darken, the walls closing in on her. Those had been Danny's last words, whispered in a dim hospital room as life slipped away from him. The family couldn't take it anymore. They decided to consult a medium, a middle-aged woman named Valerie, who agreed to conduct a séance in their home. Candles flickered as Valerie sat at the table, eyes closed. The Harpers, hands joined, watched with bated breath. Valerie began to chant, and for a moment, the room grew colder. Polly, unusually silent till now, squawked loudly, sending a jolt through everyone. Valerie's eyes snapped open. "This parrot is not mimicking your loved ones, it's channeling them. They have something urgent to say." Mark frowned. What could be so urgent that they'd terrify us through a parrot? "We need to find out," Ellie whispered. Valerie continued her chant, directing her energy towards Polly. The parrot seemed to swell, its eyes glowing an unnatural shade of red. Then it spoke, its voice a mixture of several, Danny's the most prominent. "Mum, Dad, Sis, it's not your time. Don't take the flight." The room seemed to shake, candles flickering wildly before returning to normal. Polly's eyes reverted to their usual black. It squawked and ruffled its feathers, as if shaking off the spirits it had just channeled. Valerie looked up. "Do any of you understand the message?" Mark's face drained of colour. "We're flying to Europe for a family vacation next week." Chills ran down Ellie's spine. They cancelled the trip, despite it being non-refundable, much to Lily's initial disappointment. 3 days later, the news came. The flight they were supposed to be on had crashed into the ocean. There were no survivors. The room turned ice cold as the family looked at each other, realising they'd been saved by the very thing they feared. From that day on, Polly returned to its usual self, mimicking mundane phrases and asking for crackers. But the Harpers knew better. In its own way, through squawks and eerie voices, the parrot had bridged the gap between life and death, delivering a message that defied the natural order of things. And so, they lived, with a constant chilling reminder that the boundary between this world and the next could be as thin as a feather.
Rebecca always thought cats had a mysterious aura around them, a mix of aloofness and wisdom that made you question their true nature. But Luna, the sleek black cat she'd adopted 3 years ago, was unlike any cat she'd ever known. Luna had a peculiar habit. She went missing for hours, sometimes days, and returned with small objects. At first, it was simple trinkets like rubber balls or keys. Rebecca and her husband Tom thought it was endearing, a sort of feline quirk. They never made much of it, until the objects started changing. One chilly night in November, Luna went missing. She returned at the crack of dawn, this time with a pocket knife delicately held in her jaws. Rebecca took the knife from Luna, puzzled. Why would she bring this? The same day, their neighbor, Mr. Jackson, was found dead in his home. The cause? A deep stab wound. The knife used was never found, and the death was chalked up as a result of a robbery gone wrong. A few weeks passed. Luna disappeared again. This time she returned with a small vial containing a mysterious liquid. It smelled sweet and pungent. A few days later, Mrs. Gallagher from down the street died from poisoning. The town was shaken. 2 deaths in such a short span were unheard of in their peaceful community. Whispers turned into conversations, conversations into accusations. Rebecca and Tom began to suspect. Could their cat somehow be involved in these incidents? Or was Luna an omen, a sign of tragedies yet to unfold? Tom couldn't take it anymore. He suggested they rehome Luna, but Rebecca couldn't do it. Luna was family. Days turned into weeks. Luna continued her excursions. This time, she returned with a length of rope. Rebecca's heart sank. The very next day, their neighbor's teenage son was found dead, hanging from a tree. The news said it was suicide. Rebecca wasn't so sure anymore. "We have to do something, Rebecca." Tom was visibly shaken. "What do you suggest we do?" "It's a cat, Tom, a cat." "I don't know, but these aren't coincidences anymore." Rebecca decided to confront the reality. They had to find out where Luna was going. They attached a small GPS tracker to her collar. And one night, when Luna embarked on her nocturnal adventure, they followed the signal. The GPS led them to an old, abandoned cabin in the woods. The door creaked open, revealing darkness. They stepped inside, their flashlight beams dancing on the walls. What they saw sent shivers down their spines. A makeshift altar stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by strange symbols etched onto the floor. The objects Luna had brought home were neatly arranged: the knife, the vial, the rope, and other trinkets. A book lay open, its pages filled with incantations and diagrams. Rebecca picked up the book. It was old, its pages yellow and brittle. She skimmed through it and found phrases like eternal life, soul binding, and sacrifice. Tom gasped. "Do you think, Luna?" Before he could finish, they heard a meow. Luna was at the doorway, her eyes glowing in the dark. They took Luna and raced back home, the book securely tucked under Rebecca's arm. They locked every door, closed every window. Rebecca pored over the book, her hands trembling. What she found filled her with dread. The book spoke of an ancient ritual where a feline guardian could gain extended life for its owner by offering lives in return. Each object was a symbol, a part of the ritual. It was all there: the knife for shedding blood, the poison for taking life without a trace, the rope for binding souls. "What the hell have we become a part of?" Tom's voice was barely a whisper. Rebecca shook her head. "I don't know. But we have to end this. It says here the ritual can be undone. We have to take these objects and bury them, return them to the earth to break the chain." Under the cloak of night, they dug a hole in their backyard. One by one, they placed the objects into it, reciting the incantation to reverse the ritual as instructed by the book. Luna watched silently from a distance. As they finished, the ground shook, as if confirming the reversal. The cat let out an unearthly howl and collapsed. Rebecca rushed to Luna, tears in her eyes, but the cat was still breathing, just unconscious. They took her inside and placed her gently on her favorite cushion. They burned the book, hoping to put an end to this dark chapter of their lives. Sleep came reluctantly that night, but it was a sleep of relief. The next morning, Luna was up and about as if nothing had happened. But something had changed. She wasn't her mysterious, aloof self anymore. She was just a cat, ordinary in every sense. Weeks passed, and Luna didn't go missing again. Life returned to normal, or as normal as it could be under the shadow of the unspoken horrors they had witnessed. That was until one evening, Rebecca found a sealed envelope on their doorstep. There was no address, just her name written in a shaky handwriting. Inside was a photograph. The photo was of her and Tom, taken from a distance, without their knowledge. Rebecca felt the air grow cold around her. Luna hissed and puffed up at an unseen entity in the corner of their living room. And for the first time, Rebecca questioned if they were ever the masters of their fate, or just pawns in a game played by shadows and unseen hands. The end was not the end. It was just the beginning.